नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधार श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंदा। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna, everyone. So we were discussing the 4th chapter, and I believe on Friday, Mataji, Vallabi Gopi Mataji completed verse 23. So let me share my screen. 24th is an interesting verse. Is my screen visible?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay, so let's recite this verse. You can repeat after me. Brahmarpanam Brahmaver.
Brahmarpanam Brahmahaver.
Brahmagnau Brahmana Hutam.
Brahmano Brahmana Hutam.
Hutam.
Brahmaiva Taina Gantavyam.
Brahmaiva Tena
Brahmevate
Gantavyam.
Nagantavyam.
Brahma Karma Samadhina.
Brahma Karma
Karma
Samadhina.
Samadhina.
Brahmarpanam Brahmaver.
Brahmarpanam
Brahmarpanam
Brahmaver.
Brahmahaver.
Brahmagnau Brahmana Hutam.
Brahmagno Brahmana Hutam.
Brahmaiva Taina Gantavyam.
Brahmevate
Brahmaiva Tena
Nagantavyam.
Gantavyam.
Brahma Karma Samadhina.
Brahma
Brahma Karma
Karma
Samadhina.
Samadhina.
Brahmarpanam Brahmaver.
Brahmarpanam
Brahmarpanam
Brahmaver.
Brahmahaver.
Brahmagnau Brahmana Hutam.
Brahmano
Brahmagno
Brahmana
Brahmana Hutam.
Hutam.
Brahmaiva Taina Gantavyam.
Brahmaiva Tena
Brahmevate
Gantavyam.
Nagantavyam.
Brahma Karma Samadhina.
Brahma
Brahma
Karma
Karma
Samadhina.
Samadhina.
Anyone else would like to recite?
Brahmarpanam Brahmahaver.
Brahmarpanam
Brahmarpanam
Brahmaver.
Brahmahave.
Brahmagno Brahmana Hutam.
Brahmagnau
Brahmano
Brahmana Hutam.
Brahmanahatam.
Brahmaiva Tena Gantavyam.
Brahmaiva Taina
Brahmavitena
Gantavyam.
Gantavyam.
Brahma Karma Samadhina.
Brahma
Brahma
Karma
Karma
Samadhina.
Samadhina. Brahmarpanam Brahmave.
Brahmarpanam
Brahmarpanam
Brahmaver.
Brahmaver.
Brahmano Brahmanahatam.
Brahmagnau
Brahmagno
Brahmana
Brahmana
Hutam.
Hutam.
Brahmevate Gantavyam.
Brahmaiva
Brahmaiva
Taina
Tena
Gantavyam.
Gantavyam.
Brahma Karma Samadhina.
Brahma
Brahma
Karma
Karma
Samadhina.
Samadhina.
Anyone else?
Brahmarpanam Brahmahaver.
Brahmarpanam
Brahmarpanam
Brahmaver.
Brahmaver.
Brahmagno Brahmanahutam.
Brahmagnau
Brahmagno
Brahmana
Brahmana
Hutam.
Hutam.
Brahmaiva Tena Gantavyam.
Brahmaiva Taina
Brahmaiva Tena
Gantavyam.
Gantavyam.
Brahma Karma Samadhina.
Brahma
Brahma
Karma
Karma
Samadhina.
Samadhina.
Anyone else? Okay, so let's recite the synonyms. Brahma,
Brahma.
Brahma,
spiritual in nature.
spiritual in
Spiritual in
nature.
nature.
Arpanam,
Arpanam.
contribution.
Contribution.
Brahma,
Brahma.
the supreme.
The
The
Supreme.
Supreme.
Havi,
Havi.
Havi.
butter.
Butter.
Brahma,
Brahma.
spiritual.
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 Agnau,
Agna.
Agna.
in the fire of consummation.
In
In
the
the
fire of
fire of
consummation.
consummations.
Brahmana,
Brahmana.
Brahmana.
by the spirit soul.
By
By
the
the
spirit
spirit
soul.
soul.
Hutam,
Uttam.
Uttama.
offered.
Offered.
Offer.
Brahma,
Brahma.
Brahma.
spiritual kingdom.
Spiritual
Spiritual
kingdom.
kingdom.
Eva,
Eva.
certainly,
certain,
tena,
tena,
by him,
by him,
gantavyam,
gantavyam,
to be reached,
to be reached,
brahma,
Brahma,
spiritual,
spiritual,
karma,
karma,
inactivities,
inactivities,
samadhina,
samadhina,
by complete absorption.
by complete absorption.
Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. A person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. Purport. How activities in Krishna consciousness can lead one ultimately to the spiritual goal is described here. There are various activities in Krishna consciousness and all of them will be described in the following verses. But for the present, just the principle of Krishna consciousness is described. A conditioned soul entangled in material contamination is sure to act in the material atmosphere. And yet he has to get out of such an environment. The process by which the conditioned soul can get out of the material atmosphere is Krishna consciousness. For example, a patient who is suffering from a disorder of the bowels due to overindulgence in milk products is cured by another milk product, namely curds. The materially absorbed conditioned soul can be cured by Krishna consciousness as set forth here in the Gita. This process is generally known as yagya or activities, sacrifices, simply meant for the satisfaction of Vishnu or Krishna. The more the activities of the material world are performed in Krishna consciousness or for Vishnu only, the more the atmosphere becomes spiritualized by complete absorption. The word Brahma, Brahman means spiritual. The Lord is spiritual and the rays of his transcendental body are called Brahma Jyotir. His spiritual effulgence, everything that exists is situated in that Brahma Jyotir. But when the Jyotir is covered by illusion or sense gratification, Maya or sense gratification, it is called material. This material wheel can be removed at once by Krishna consciousness. Thus, the offering for the sake of Krishna consciousness, the consuming agent of such an offering or contribution, the process of consumption, the contributor and the result are all combined together, Brahman, or the absolute truth. The absolute truth covered by Maya is called matter. Very interesting. The absolute truth covered by Maya is called matter. Matter dovetailed for the cause of absolute truth regains its spiritual quality. Krishna consciousness is the process of converting the illusory consciousness into Brahman or the Supreme. When the mind is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness, it is said to be in samadhi or trance. Anything done in such transcendental consciousness is called yagya or sacrifice for the absolute. In that condition of spiritual consciousness, the contributor, the contribution, the consumption, the performer or leader of the performance, and the result or ultimate gain, everything becomes one in the absolute, the supreme Brahman. That is the method of Krishna consciousness. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarini. I'll read the translation one more time. A person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. So this verse, Brahmarpanam Brahmavir Brahmagno Brahmana Hutam Brahmaiva Taina Gantavyam Brahma Karma Samadhina. So this is a popular verse. Does this verse rings a bell? Has anyone heard this verse before?
Actually, I've not heard it before, but it's a lot of alliteration
Yeah.
in the verse.
There are 12 syllables in this verse, and 6 of those 12 syllables have Brahman in it. So
Right.
actually, it is the Mahaprasada Govinda prayer, of, I don't want to say Mayavadis, but in many Hindu circles, this is
Really?
used as the Mahaprasade Govinda. So their idea is Brahmarpanam Brahmave. So this food is Brahman and this is going into Brahma. So I am also Brahman. Food is also Brahman and it is going into Brahma. So that's how they. So I have heard this many times, and in different temples also this verse is recited. And when I had not read Bhagavad Gita, I used to always wonder, what is this Brahmarpanam Brahmave Brahmagno, Brahmataina Gantavyam. So, but later when I read Bhagavad Gita and when I read Prabhupada's commentary and of course other Acharya's commentary, I could understand what that verse actually means. So before we discuss about this verse further, so no one has heard this verse before. I thought it's a very popular verse in the Hindu circles. I've heard this many times. Once
I am not. I was just struck by the alliteration, and
yeah.
I was thinking of, like, when I was in school, we had said something like, Betty bought some butter, the butter was bitter, so she brought some better butter to make the bitter butter. But that's what I was thinking of. That was all the alliteration. Yeah. But I had not heard this verse before. I mean, even though we have read the Bhagavad Gita, this verse had not struck in my head.
Yeah. Once I attended a program by RSS. Even there, just before taking food, they had recited this. So
oh, really?
It's very popular verse. Anyway, so actually, so what had happened here is Krishna was talking about the principle of karma. So he started talking about the principle of karma in the 14th verse. So right now we are discussing 24th. So 14 until 23 is talking about, more about the principle of karma. But when he starts talking about the principle of karma right there in the 14th verse, he talks about that no work actually binds Krishna. Namam karmani limpanti name karma phale spriha. So he says that actually no work can bind me and I do not aspire for any specific results. And then he says, iti mam yu abhijanati karmabhir nasa badhyate. He says, and one who understands this about me, he himself will also not get bound by karma. So that's how he starts this section. And then he kinds of start talking about the principle, evam gyatva kritam karma purvair api mumukshubhihi Kuru karmaiva tasmatvam purvahe purvataram karam. He says that actually all the people who have got liberation in the past, they actually understand this about my transcendental nature. And then he tells to Arjuna, you should also act like this. Don't get attached to the results of the work. Don't basically aspire for anything in specific. The idea is that you should act out of duty, act out of obligation. Don't be after a specific result. And then he talks about it is very difficult to understand what is to be done and what is not to be done. Kim karma kim akarmeti kavayo apyatra mohitaha tatte karma pravakshyami yagyatva mokshase shubhat. He says that even the people who are like gyanis, they also cannot understand what is action, what is to be done, what is not to be done. But when they understand this, what is to be done and what is not to be done, then what happens? Yagyatva mokshase shubhat. Just knowing this can become the platform for their liberation. So this yagyatva mokshase shubhat, it comes elsewhere in the Bhagavad Gita in 9.1. If you remember, 9.1 is the heart of the bhakti section in the Gita. So there Krishna says, idam tute guhyatam prarakshami anusuyave jnana vijnana sahitam yagyatva mokshase shubhat. He says that this knowledge, that I'm going to give you, it's very confidential. Guhyatamam. And then, and because you're non-envious to me, I'm telling this to you. And then, when you get this, and by realizing this knowledge, he says, yagyatva mokshase shubhat, you shall be relieved of all miseries of material existence. Mokshase ashubhat. Chakravarti Pad actually explains over there that in this word there is Shubha and Ashubha, but actually speaking both are Ashubha because both keeps us bound in this material world. So idea is that we get liberated from both Shubha and Ashubha. And then he starts talking about karmano hi apya bodhavyam cha vikarmanah akarmanash bodhavyam gahana karmano gati. He says that the intricacies of action are very difficult to understand. Gahana karmano gati. And what is so gahana about it? What is so um, um, difficult to understand? He says karmanya karma yaha pashyed akarmani cha karma yaha sa buddhiman manusheshu sa yuktah krishna karma krit. He says that one who says inaction in action and action in inaction, no, he actually is intelligent. So we had discussed this verse that this is very confusing in one sense, but what that actually means is one who can understand that sometimes without any action also we can get reaction, and sometimes without doing any by doing action also we sometimes we don't get any reaction. So that is like the intricacies of karma. So but how it happens, that we had discussed. So that was 4.18. And from there, Krishna builds on that argument. And then he says, so he is talking about that how the Karma Yogi actually acts. What is the knowledge that the Karma Yogi has? Tyaktva karma phala sangam nitya tripto nirashrayah karmanya abhipravritto api naiva kinchit karoti saha. So a person who basically abandons all attachment to the results of the activities, and then one who is satisfied and independent, he actually performs no fruitive action. Although he may be engaged in various kinds of activities, but he actually doesn't perform any fruitive action. So how it is he says nitya tripto nirashrayah. Such a person doesn't take shelter of the fruits of his work. That is the key for our understanding. Sometimes we make big plans that, okay, I will do work like this and I will get this in return, and then when I get this, then I will do that. So the idea is that we take shelter of the future results that are going to come to us. So a person, a karma yogi, he doesn't take shelter of the fruits of it. So he just acts out of obligation, and he doesn't get attached to the results that are going to come. He doesn't make future plans that, okay, when I get this, then I do this, then I do that. Now sometimes we do, as devotees, sometimes we make plans that, okay, we will build a big temple, and then when we will have big temple, then we will have many devotees over there, and then the preaching will flourish, and then we'll make these many devotees. Like that, sometimes we also do that. But the idea there is that that is done for the service of Krishna, not for any material sense gratification. So even Prabhupada had once, when he was not very successful in US, in India itself, he had said, it's documented actually. I think it's there even in Prabhupada Lilamrit. So at one point, Prabhupada says that actually there are many temples and there are many devotees. It is just time that is separating us from that. So Prabhupada could see the future in the sense that he was also dreaming that there would be many temples and there would be many devotees in those temples. And it's just time that is separating us. But that he was doing for the service of Krishna, not for any personal sense gratification. He had no interest that, if once I have this, then I'll enjoy like this. Though that was not the idea. And right in the previous verse, Krishna had talked again about doing work as sacrifice. Gata sangasya muktasya gyavasthitah chetasah yagya achritah karma samagram praviliyate yagya achritah karma. So he had said that, work done as a sacrifice, karma yagya achritah. So this is so this theme, that doing work as a sacrifice for Vishnu, yagya vai Vishnu, that's how Prabhupada explains this. Yagya vai Vishnu. Yagya means Vishnu. Vishnu is not different from sacrifices. So when we act like this, then when we perform work as a sacrifice, then we don't get bound. So how it is how this works is that is described in the 3rd chapter in the 15th verse. Why is it that actually, when the work is done as without attachment to the results, how does it actually liberates a person? So that principle is given in the 3rd chapter in the 15th verse. Karma brahmodbhavam vidhi brahmakshara samudbhavam tasmat sarvagatam brahma nityam yagya pratishthitam. So there Krishna says that actually the acts of sacrifices are prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas are directly manifested from the Supreme Lord, from Vishnu, you know, because it is directly coming from Vishnu. So these activities are in by nature, they are spiritual, because anything that comes directly from Vishnu is spiritual. So then, Krishna says, Tasmat Sarvagatam Brahma. Therefore, that Brahman which pervades everywhere, which is there everywhere, Nityam Yagya Pratishtitam. So that Brahman, it actually gets situated in the acts of sacrifice. Although the Brahman is all pervading, but it gets situated in the acts of sacrifice. So that's how Krishna had mentioned. So the karma section kinds of ends by verse 22. You know, the intricacies of karma, the principle of karma, how it works, and how, you know, when the person is not attached to the results of the work, when he doesn't take shelter of the future results that are going to come, then everything become transcendental. You know, so that section had ended by 4.22, and 4.23 onwards, the focus comes on sacrifices, different kinds of sacrifices. So one kind of sacrifice is that, you know, performing work itself as worship, as a sacrifice. यज्ञार्थार्थ कर्मणोऽन्यत्र लोकोयम कर्म बंधने तदर्थ कर्म कौन्तेय मुक्त संघः समाचरात्. So that principle was given in the 3rd chapter, but that same theme continues in the 4th chapter. So one kind of sacrifice is, you know, doing work as a sacrifice to Vishnu, yajnartharth karmanonyatra. But there are other kinds of sacrifices also, and what those other kinds of sacrifices are, that is what Krishna is talking about now. So first he talks about Brahmarpadam Brahmavir Brahmagno Brahmana Hutam Brahmaiva Tena Gantavyam Brahma Karma Samadhina. So this verse gets, you know, it is very confusing in one sense, because, you know, out of, as I was saying, that out of the 12 syllables in this verse, 6 have Brahma in it, Brahman, and that creates a lot of confusion. What does this Brahma means? And then we know that Sanskrit is a multivalent language, and same words may have different meanings, and that's what we see here. The same word Brahma can be used in different senses, and then that's how Prabhupada also uses it. When you see his word-to-word translation and then the full translation, a person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute, and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. Now, Chakravarti Pad, he gives a very Rasik commentary. He is known for giving Rasik commentaries. So he gives a very, you know, very brilliant commentary over there. So he says that actually what Krishna is asking Arjuna to do here is, he's telling Arjuna that, Arjuna, you know, I want you to do a sacrifice on this battlefield. And that sacrifice is that, you know, this whole Kurukshetra, it is like the Yagya Bhumi. You know, and then your anger is like fire, and your Gandiva, your Dhanush, your bow and arrow, they are like the spoon for offering the oblations in the fire. And these Kauravas, they are like the actual oblations that are supposed to be offered in the fire. And then, you know, you perform this yagya, you know, using your Gandiva, you offer this, you know, consider these Kauravas as, you know, the sacrificial, you know, what do we call the material that is to be offered in the fire. Consider them as oblations, and then do it, you know, just offer this yagya to me and I will accept it. And later, actually, we see in the 11th chapter, you know, Arjuna actually sees when Krishna shows the Virat Rupa, the Vishwarupa, you know, there even in the Kala Rupa, there Krishna shows to Arjuna that how these all the different you know, Kaurava warriors, they're entering into the mouth. So there's the mouth is like very ferocious, and the fire is coming out of the mouth, and all these Kaurava warriors, they're entering into the mouth of this Kala Rupa. So in one sense, he is asking that you offer these Kauravas to me in sacrifice, and I'll accept them. You know, I will accept your sacrifice. I'll accept your offering to me. So that's how Chakravarti Pad explains. Now here, Prabhupada gives, again, he gives a brilliant purport to this. So one thing that is striking is, which I also highlighted here, is the absolute truth covered by Maya is called matter. Now, this is a little, how to understand this? That absolute truth covered by Maya is called matter. Now, what happens is everything comes from Krishna. We understand that, aham sarvasya prabhava mattaha sarvam pravartate. I am the source of everything, and everything comes from me. Iti matva bhajante ma buddha bhava samadvita. That is 10.8 Krishna had said. So everything comes from Krishna. And because everything comes from Krishna, in essence, everything is spiritual. So we understand that there are two things actually. There is the composition and there is the application. Composition in the sense that different things may be made up of different kinds of composition. So we understand that in the absolute truth there are two primary elements, and I shouldn't use the word element here, but just for the sake of understanding. So one is consciousness and one is matter. So consciousness, as we understand, is spiritual, and matter, as we understand, is material. But actually, from a composition perspective, we understand that, but both have their source in Krishna, But from an application perspective, when we say that, okay, when we use something in the service of Krishna, that thing becomes spiritual. It becomes spiritualized. It doesn't mean that the composition of that thing changes. It still remains, the composition still remains matter. It still remains material. But when we offer it to Krishna or we use it in the service of Krishna, it becomes spiritualized through the application of it. So for example, when I am speaking about Krishna through this microphone, although this is made of matter, but it is kind of spiritualized now. Similarly, although our consciousness is spiritual by composition, but when we utilize our consciousness in mundane material things, it becomes material. When we say our consciousness has become material, in the sense that all we think about is matter, all we think about is sense gratification. So what is Prabhupada telling here is the absolute truth covered by Maya is called matter. So in one sense everything is Brahman, but when it gets covered by Maya, in a sense that when we perceive it as matter, then it becomes Maya. So there is a wonderful definition that comes about what exactly is Maya. So Brahma, when he asked Lord Vishnu, that is in the 3rd canto, I think it's the 11th chapter, if I'm not wrong. So he asked Lord Vishnu, just before the creation is about to unfold, he performs sacrifices to please Vishnu, and Vishnu appears, and there is a discussion that happens between Brahma and Vishnu. So he offers prayer to Vishnu, and then Vishnu tells Brahma, but actually, oh Brahma, he says that anything that you see of value in this world, and if you see it disconnected from me, understand that to be Maya. So what it means is, if we see anything in relationship with Krishna or Vishnu, that is not Maya. But when we see that disconnected from Vishnu or Krishna, then that becomes the source of Maya. For example, Sita Devi is the spiritual potency of the Lord. In one sense, Sita Devi is not different from Vishnu, from Lord Ram. But Ravana, he saw Sita Devi as an object of his own sense gratification. He was seeing Sita Devi disconnected from Lord Ram. And that same Sita Devi, who is Lakshmi, who is all auspicious, that same Sita Devi became the cause of inauspiciousness for Ravana. Ravana became completely destroyed by that. Although we say that Lakshmi Devi is auspicious, we try to get mercy of Lakshmi Devi. But when we see Lakshmi disconnected from Vishnu, even that same Lakshmi can become the cause of our destruction. So therefore, Prabhupada also says that, when you get Lakshmi, when you get, material opulence, material prosperity, use it for the service of Vishnu or Krishna. Otherwise, it will become the source of our own destruction. So the absolute truth covered by Maya is called matter. So when we see things disconnected from Vishnu or the absolute truth, then it becomes the source of Maya for us. And then Prabhupada says, matter dovetailed for the cause of the absolute truth regains its spiritual quality. And then Prabhupada says, Krishna consciousness is a process of converting the illusory consciousness into Brahman or the Supreme. When the mind is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness, it is said to be in samadhi or trance. So Actually, that is the goal of Krishna consciousness. You know, Prabhupada writes that in the introduction to Gita. He says that the art of offering our mind and intelligence to Krishna, that is actually Krishna consciousness. You know, Maya asakta manaha partha yogam yunjan madashraya asamshayam samagram mam yatha gyasasi tatshunu, 7.1. That's how Krishna, that is the starting, you know, the first verse of the bhakti section of the Gita, 7.1. Maya asakta manaha, right there Krishna says that, you know, you make your mind attached to me. Maya asakta manaha partha yogam yunjan madashraya. But it's not easy. So right in the next verse, he qualifies that Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschid yatad siddhaya yatatam api siddhanam kaschin mam vaiti tattvataha. So you say that out of many thousands of men, you know, very few actually endeavor for spiritual perfection. And out of those few, only one or two actually understand me. Tattvataha. They truly understand me. So they are very few, very rare. Rarely it happens. But if it happens, then there is a glorious result. And that glorious result is yagyatva moksha se shubhat. That, you know, if you act like this, if you can understand this, and if you act in this way, in this consciousness, then you will become free from, shubha and ashubha of this world. You'll come back to me. Yagyatvana nivartante tadadhama paramam mama. You will go back to Krishna, or we will go back to Krishna, that supreme abode of Krishna, which is not illumined by sun or moon. So I just take a quick pause and see if there are any questions, comments, or corrections about what I said. Okay. Looks like there are no questions or comments or corrections. So let me move on to the next verse. This is 4.25. I'll share my screen. Okay, I'll recite this verse only once, and then we'll move on to the translation and purport. You can repeat after me. Daivam eva pare yagyam
Pare yajnam
yogi naha pari upasate
yogina paryupasate
brahmagnam apare yagyam
brahmagnava pare yajnam
yagye naiva pajuhavati.
yajne naivo pajuvati.
Translation. Some yogis perfectly worship the demigods by offering different sacrifices to them, and some offer sacrifices in the fire of the Supreme Brahman. Purport. As described above, a person engaged in discharging duties in Krishna consciousness is also called a perfect yogi or a first-class mystic. But there are others also who perform similar sacrifices in the worship of demigods, and still others who sacrifice to the Supreme Brahman or the impersonal feature of the Supreme Lord. So there are different kinds of sacrifices in terms of different categories. Such different categories of sacrifice by different types of performers only superficially demark varieties of sacrifice. Factually, sacrifice means to satisfy the Supreme Factually, sacrifice means to satisfy the Supreme Lord Vishnu, who is also known as Yagya. All the different varieties of sacrifice can be placed within two primary divisions, namely sacrifice of worldly possessions and sacrifice in pursuit of transcendental knowledge. Those who are in Krishna consciousness sacrifice all material possessions for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, while others who want some temporary material happiness sacrifice their material possessions to satisfy demigods such as Indra, the sun god, etc. And others who are impersonalists sacrifice their identity by merging into the existence of impersonal Brahman. The demigods are powerful living entities appointed by the Supreme Lord for the maintenance and supervision of all material functions, like the heating, watering, and lighting of the universe. Those who are interested in material benefits worship the demigods by various sacrifices according to the Vedic rituals. They are called Baha Ishwaravadi, or believers in many gods, but others who worship the impersonal feature of the absolute truth and regard the forms of the demigods as temporary, sacrifice their individual selves in supreme fire, and thus end their individual existences by merging into the existence of the Supreme. Such impersonalists sacrifice their time in philosophical speculation to understand the transcendental nature of the Supreme. In other words, the fruitive workers sacrifice their material possessions for material enjoyment, whereas the impersonalist sacrifices his material designations with a view to merging into the existence of the Supreme. For the impersonalist, the fire altar of sacrifice is the Supreme Brahman, and the offering is the self being consumed by the fire of Brahman. The Krishna conscious person, like Arjuna, however, sacrifices everything for the satisfaction of Krishna, and thus all his material possessions as well as his own self, everything is sacrificed for Krishna. Thus, he is the first class yogi, but he does not lose his individual existence. So I'll read the translation one more time. Some yogis perfectly worship the demigods by offering different sacrifices to them, and some offer sacrifices in the fire of Supreme Brahman. So actually, when I'm reading this verse, it reminds me of there's another such verse that comes in the 9th chapter. I believe it's the 15th verse of the 9th chapter. Jnana yagyena chapyanye yajanto mam upasate ekatvena prithaktvena bahudha vishwato mukham. So there Krishna talks about that there are different kinds. So first he talks about the devotees. I think that comes in 9.13. Mahatmanas tu mam patha daivim prakritim ashritaha bhajante ananya manaso gyatva bhutadim avyayam. And then that's how he describes the bhakti yogis, and then he talks about their activities in the 9.14th verse. Satatam kirtayanto mam yatantascha dridvataha namaschantascha mam bhaktya nitya yukta upasate. And then he talks about other kinds of transcendentalists. So he talks about jnana yagyena chapyanya yajanto mam upasate. Those who perform jnana yagya, so the jnana yagya, Prabhupada gives the details of what exactly is jnana yagya. It is also a kind of yagya where the yagya bhumi is Brahman and the ahuti is of the self. They offer their self to Krishna, to Brahman, and the idea is they want to merge into Brahman. They want to lose their identity into Brahman. So Krishna says that actually they worship me in this way. Jnana yagyena chapyanne yajanto mam upasate. And ekatvena prithaktvena bahudha vishwato mukham. So ekatvena, he says it is those who want to become one with Brahman, ekatvena, and prithaktvena bahudha. Those are people who understand that there are many gods. Prithaktvena bahudha vishwato mukham. Vishwato mukham is the worshippers of the Vishwarupa. So the idea, so here actually when Krishna is talking about, so there is a word that is used. Krishna says, Daivam eva pare yagyam yoginaha pari upasate. So here when the word yogi is used, and at the same time, it is said that they are worshipping devas. Now, some acharyas explain that this is not the ordinary demigod worship, because the word yogi is used. So there is a concept of pratikopasna. Pratikopasna is, so there are two kinds of demigod worship. One is where we understand that, okay, there are many gods, many demigods are gods, and they are competitors, and we have no understanding of who is the supreme. We think that, okay, sometimes this, so there is, and this is like very, people who have very poor fund of knowledge, their idea is that there is a constant struggle going on between the demigods for, so sometimes people ask these kind of questions, who, if there is a fight between Vishnu and Krishna, or Vishnu and Shiva, who will win, and or Vishnu or Brahma, who will win? Those kind of questions you might have heard from people. So they have no understanding of what exactly is the concept of divinity in the Vedic context. So pratikopasna means that people understand that although they are demigods and they are very powerful beings, but they are pratika. Pratik means representative. They are the representative of the Supreme Lord Vishnu. So they understand this. And with that understanding, they perform different kinds of sacrifices for those particular now they understand that, okay, Surya has a particular purpose, although he is a representative of the Supreme Lord, but there is a particular purpose for Surya. So when they want some kind of results like that, they will offer worship to Surya. So similarly, there are other kinds of demigods, and they will offer different sacrifices to different demigods in that sense. But they understand that, indirectly they are worshipping Vishnu, because these are representatives of Vishnu. So the offerings that they are making to these demigods, they are ultimately going to Vishnu. So, but there are others who don't understand this concept. So for them, they don't understand that. So they think that, okay, there is a pantheon of gods in the Vedic tradition, and Vishnu is just one of them. But Vishnu is actually not just one of them. Vishnu is the basis of everyone. Vishnu is the source of everyone and is the basis of everyone. Without Vishnu, without Krishna, nothing can actually exist. We can't exist. Even the demigods cannot exist. So, and the others, Prabhupada explains, Krishna explains that there are others who sacrifices, and some offer sacrifices in the fire of the Supreme Brahman. So that is talking about the Jnana Yogis. So Jnana Yogis, now we had discussed that there is a difference between the Jnana Yogis and the Mayavadis. The difference is that the real Jnana Yogis, and this is the explanation given by Chakravarti Pad himself, that Jnana Yagyena Chapyante Janto Mamupasate Ekatvena Prataktvena Bahuda Vishwato Mukham. So when that verse comes, there he explains that this Jnana Yagya only, so there are two kinds of impersonalists. One are the Jnana Yogis and the others are Mayavadis. So the difference is that the Mayavadis, they think that they consider the form of the Lord, the Supreme Lord, to be a product of Maya. So their idea is that when the Supreme, the all-pervading Brahman, the Nirakar Brahman, when it comes in the contact of the mode of goodness, it comes down as an avatar. So, and this avatar has no lasting existence, no eternal existence. It goes back and merges into Brahman. That is their idea. So, because they think that, when the Brahman comes in the contact of material mode of goodness, it gets contaminated by the material mode of goodness, and then it comes on as avatar. So their idea is, so because material mode of goodness is material, it is a product of Maya. So therefore the avatar is also a product of Maya. So those people who understand like this, they are actually Mayavadis. But the true Jnana Yogis, the true impersonalists, they don't, either they understand the difference between the personal and impersonal form, but yet they are still attracted to the impersonal form. So there are yogis like that, Jnana Yogis like that, which are described in the Bhagavatam itself. So we have the speaker of Bhagavatam itself, the Shukdev Goswami. He himself was an impersonalist earlier, but later he becomes a personalist. Similarly, the four Kumaras, it is explained that they were also impersonalists earlier, but when they smelled the fragrance of the tulsi leaves coming from the lotus feet of Vishnu, so they go to Vaikuntha. They had heard about Lord Vishnu and they want to see. They have never seen Lord Vishnu, and they are, by the dint of their austerities, they had the power to go to the Vaikuntha planets. So they go over there, and then we understand that the whole pastime is that Jai Vijay stops them, and there's a commotion that is happening, and they're cursing the Jai and Vijay. And when Lord Vishnu hears this, when Narayan, when he hears it, he tries to come out. When he is still walking towards them, the fragrance of the tulsi leaves, it enters into the nostrils of these four Kumaras, and that actually it is explained that disturbed their samadhi on Brahman. So they were fixed in Brahman, but for the first time they got disturbed. It disturbed their samadhi in Brahman. So, and then they saw Lord Vishnu, and when they saw Lord Vishnu, Lord Narayan, they were like zapped. They couldn't just do anything. It is explained. It was Lord Vishnu was so beautiful. They had not seen anything like that before. So although they were not attracted to forms, they were attracted to the impersonal Brahman. But when they saw the transcendental form of Lord Narayan, they were so attracted to it. And then it is explained in Bhagavatam that whatever Lord Vishnu spoke, they were not, although the the sound was going into their ear, but they were just absorbed in Vishnu, and whatever Lord Vishnu said, they just shook their heads and then they walked away from there. They just couldn't hear. So that is the form of Vishnu. So these kind of people who are not offensive to the Lord, who don't consider the form of the Lord to be product of Maya, they are actually Gyan Yagya, the people who actually perform Gyan Yagya. But the people who are offensive to the form of the Lord, they are actually Mayavadis, and they are not performing Gyan Yagya in one sense, we should say. And Acharya has described that for such people, there is a verse that comes in the 9th chapter itself. I believe that's 9.12. What is that verse? Moghasha mogha karmano mogha jnana vichetasaha rakshasim asurim chaiva prakritim mohinim shritaha. So that is what is going to happen to them, because they misunderstand Krishna. So avajananti mam mudha manushim tanumashritah param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram. So we had discussed this in the past. Avajananti. So there are three words: jananti, ajananti, and avajananti. So jananti is to know. Ajananti is to not know. Ajanata mahimananta vedam. That's how Arjuna describes in the 11th chapter when he's offering prayers to Lord Krishna. He says, I didn't know your glories, my dear Lord. Ajanant, Janata Mahima Ananta Vedam. But avajananti is to know the opposite of what is true. It is avajananti. So Krishna says, avajananti mam mudha manushim tanu ashritaha. When I come in a manushim tanu, in a human-like form, they deride me. Param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram. They don't understand my real bhava. They don't understand my real nature, that I am Mama Bhuta Maheshwaram. I am the great Lord of all living entities. And for such people, it is explained what is going to happen to them is Moghasha Mogha Karmano Mogha Jnana Vichitasa. All their aspirations, all their activities, everything is Mogha. Mogha means they will be destroyed. It will actually not give them any results. And then something more scary he describes. Rakshasim Asurim Chaiva. Rakshasi and Asuri Prakriti they will attain, not the form itself, but Rakshasi and Asuri, basically they will attain, they will be influenced by the mode of passion and ignorance. Rakshasim Asurim Chaiva Prakritim Mohinim Shritaha. So that's how Krishna describes there. So here, actually, when we are coming back to the verse that we were discussing, so Prabhupada explains this very nicely. I wanted to read out one part here. Those who are interested in material benefits worship the demigods by various sacrifices according to the Vedic rituals. They are called Bahu Ishwaravadi. Bahu Ishwar means many Ishwaras. There are many different gods. Or believers in many gods. But others who worship the impersonal feature of the absolute truth and regard the forms of the gods, demigods, as temporary. So actually the concept of demigod worship is also talked about in the 4th chapter. There is a verse that comes when Krishna starts talking about what is that verse? Anyone remembers what is that verse where Krishna talks about Shipram hi manushe loke? That's how it comes, right? 1 second, I just check. Yeah, 4.12. Shipram hi manushe loke siddhir bhavati karmaja. So kangshandataha karmanam siddhim yajanta iha devataha. So Prabhupada translates this: men in this world desire success in fruitive activities and therefore they worship the demigods. Quickly, of course, men get results from fruitive work in this world. So Krishna had said in the 4.12th verse that actually people who worship demigods, they get results very quickly. Shipram hi manushelo. Shipram means quickly, without any delay. So how it works is, if say for example, how is it that Krishna, if he is the Supreme Lord, a person who is worshipping Krishna gets results, delayed results, and people who worship demigods, they get quick results. How is it? How is that? So there is an analogy that is used by Acharyas. So the analogy is that suppose a child is there and he wants to eat some sweets, but he has a bad tooth. So he'll go to his mother and he'll tell his mother that, I want to eat sweets. Give me something sweet to eat. So the mother would say, no, you have a sweet tooth. You shouldn't eat it now. Once your tooth becomes good, then you can eat it. so don't eat now. So mother will tell him the reason also that why you should not eat. But this child, he is so eager to eat that he has some money with him, and then he goes to a shop outside, and then he buys the shopkeeper, he's just interested in money. He'll take the money and he'll give the sweet. He will not care about what has happened to his sweet. So that is the position of the demigods. So demigods, it is like a give and take relationship with them. They think, okay, this person is offering me some sacrifices, something, and therefore let me give him something in return. So that's how it is. But Vishnu, he understands, or Krishna, he understands what is good for us. Even though we may ask for it, but Krishna understands that this is not good for him. He is basically asking for some fruitive things. He is asking for some material things from me, and ultimately it is going to harm his consciousness. So how it happens is, Krishna wants us to be happy. Krishna is like a parent, but that happiness has to be healthy happiness. Sometimes there are, when we read the books of Srila Prabhupada, or the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. So I was surprised that, sometimes the parents would themselves bring their children to Prabhupada and tell Prabhupada that, actually my son, he's addicted to drugs. And I have heard that you can cure this. I have taken him to so many different, de-addiction centers and whatnot, but nothing has helped. But I have heard from many people that you can actually take care of such people. So they would themselves bring to Prabhupada. So, the parent want their children to be happy. So when a child takes drugs, he's happy, he is high, he is on cloud 9. There is nothing better for him. At least that's how he thinks. But the parent understands that this is not healthy. This is not the kind of happiness that he should get. He should be happy in a healthy way. So therefore, he doesn't want his children to get into bad company, or any bad kind of activities. And that's how it applies to Krishna also. Krishna is like a parent for us. Mamayo amsho jivaloke jiva bhutah sanatanaha manha shasthani indrani prakriti sthani karshati. All living entities in this world, they're my parts and parcels. Aham bija pradah pita. So I am the seed giving father of all the yonis, all the species that are there in this material world. So Krishna is our father, and he wants us to be happy. So he doesn't want to give us anything which is temporary. He wants us to be happy by getting permanent results. There is a verse that comes in the 5th chapter. Krishna says to Arjuna, Adya antavantaha konteya teshu ramate buddha. He says that, these material things or material desires, they have a beginning and an end. Adya is beginning, and antavantah means it has an end. Nateshu ramate buddha. Therefore, people who are intelligent, buddha, they are people who are intelligent. Nateshu ramate. They don't enjoy, they don't desire enjoyment from these kind of things, from these kind of engagements. And what is the kind of enjoyment that elevated or transcendentalist desire for? That's what Krishna describes in 10th chapter 9th verse. Macchitta madgatah prana bodhayantaha parasparam kathayantasya mam nityam tushyanti cha ramanti cha. So what is the kind of happiness that the transcendentalists do raman in? That is the kathayantasya mam nityam, my katha. Their lives are dedicated to me. Their consciousness is always fixed upon me. That's how Krishna describes. That is 10.9. So I know we only have 5 minutes left. So let me take a quick pause here and see if there are any questions, comments, or corrections about what I said today. So we discussed 24th and the 25th verse today. Okay, let me read the translation one more time. Some yogis perfectly worship the demigods by offering different sacrifices to them, and some offer sacrifices in the fire of the Supreme Brahman. Any questions, corrections, or comments about what I said today?
Can you talk more about how something gets spiritualized? Is it like the iron rod when it is in the fire?
Yeah.
What gives the
Right.
example, right?
It
Exactly.
takes on the quality of the fire itself, even though it's an iron rod, right?
Right, exactly. That's the analogy that Prabhupada uses. So anything that is used in the service of Krishna, that although the composition will still be material, but by application it becomes spiritualized. So we see, so the iron rod, we see that, you know, when it is put in the fire, we can see it becoming fire. But you know, the activities, transcendental activities, they are not just subtle. You know, subtle is sometimes used for material things. You know, matter is also, there is a kind of matter which is subtle, but transcendental is even beyond subtle. So we can't see how things are getting spiritualized in application because we don't have the vision to see it, but we have to believe in what the Guru, Sadhu and Shastras are telling us. So we read from the scriptures that, you know, anything that is offered to Krishna becomes spiritualized when the food that is prepared, although the food is material, but when it is offered to Krishna, it becomes spiritualized. Acharyas explain, and even the scriptures explain, that prasad is not different from Krishna. Mahaprasade Govinde Nam Brahmane Vaishnave. You know, so it is not, it is Krishna himself who is manifested as prasad. And although we are not very intelligent, we can't understand spiritual things, but Krishna actually comes as prasad, and prasad is something that we relish, we enjoy eating. And that's how, you know, when we eat that prasad, our consciousness becomes spiritualized. So the composition is still material, because when we eat prasad too much, we'll become fat, we'll gain weight, you know. So it may have a material component to it, but it also acts as at a transcendental plane. So similarly, anything that is offered to Krishna or used for the service of Krishna, that becomes spiritualized. So that's what I was trying to explain. Like for example, the deities. So when we look at the deity, so there is one of the offenses to consider the deity to be material. So we understand that deity is not different from Krishna, but we also know that the composition of the deity is matter. But Krishna actually manifests himself through matter, and that's how the deity becomes spiritual. It's not just matter. So to consider the deity only material, that is an offense. But when we understand that, you know, deity has to be, sometimes there are some fly would come and we'll have to hush the fly away, and then sometimes there will be some dust that would come if we don't serve the deity nicely. So some dust may also accumulate. So the composition is material, but by application it is spiritual.
Srila Prabhupada even said a picture of Krishna is still Krishna,
Spiritual,
not
exactly.
just beauty. Yeah.
Anything that can remind us of Krishna, or which takes our consciousness or remembrance of Krishna, that is spiritual. So that's how is explained in Bhagavatam. You know, anything of value, if you see anything of value in this world, and if you see it disconnected from me, know that to be Maya. So there are only two things: either there is Maya or there is Krishna. You know, what is it? Yaha nahi Maya, yaha nahi Krishna, tahare Maya re andhakar. What is that verse? I'm missing that in the Chaitanya Charitamrita.
Yeah. So Krishna Surya Sama, is
Yeah,
that the one?
right.
Yeah.
Krishna Surya Sama Maya hai andhakar. Yaha nahi Krishna, yaha hai Krishna, taha nahi Maya ra adhikar. That's how it is.
Mm-hmm.
But the converse is also true. Wherever there is no Krishna, then that is the jurisdiction of Maya. So where there is Krishna, there is no jurisdiction of Maya. But where there is not, where Krishna is not there, that is actually the jurisdiction of Maya. So anything that doesn't remind us of Krishna, that becomes material or Maya. Anything that can remind us of Krishna, even a picture of Krishna or a book, Bhagavatam, that reminds of Krishna, or Bhagavad Gita, that also is spiritual.
Thank you.
Okay. There are no more comments or questions, then we can stop here. So offer our obeisance to the Vaishnavas. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhyabhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo Gaudiya Vaishnavanda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai.
Ganpati Govind Prabhu ki jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna, everyone.